to kind of give you an idea of what we can expect maybe the next several weeks. So as of right now, there's really only, I think, 2 sermons left regarding evangelism that I feel like the Lord wants me to preach on. One is over, like I said, just the practical stuff. How do you do evangelism? How do you share the gospel? When? How do you know when's the right time? How do you know what to say? How do you know how much to say? Or is there a time when it's best not to say? There's a lot of questions when it comes to how do you reach the lost? How do you evangelize? How do you do that? And so I am going to preach on just try to answer a lot of those practical questions. And then the last sermon is going to be over what I think is actually the by far the single most important element of evangelism. And I'm preaching that last because I think that needs to be the very last thing that we hear. The by far, when all else fails, there's one single thing that we must have, that without it, I don't think evangelism is possible, and it's love. And so that's going to be the last thing. So this morning, we're going to go a little different direction. And it's because, as the Lord moves, and then after the next couple of weeks, the Lord is going to just kind of direct us as to how to reach the lost. Then we're gonna go out and reach the lost, and the Lord's going to save people. And as God continues to move in this church, and as He saves souls, and as He increases His activity, which I believe He will, I believe we'll see more of the Spirit's activity in the church. We'll see more just of the movement of God, of the miraculous power of God. When that happens, when God begins to really move more than ever before, there's a lot of dangers that come with that. There's a lot of ways that we can kind of get off focus when God moves, and there's a lot of ways that Satan likes to manipulate things when God is moving to try to get us to ruin the movement of God by being distracted or whatever. And so I want us to kind of go over this morning what I think is one of the big ways that we often can be distracted or thrown off course when God is moving powerfully. And I feel like the Lord wants me to share this as kind of sort of a warning for us to watch out for this in the future. And in order to do that, we're going to go through the story of the Transfiguration. The Transfiguration is in Matthew, Mark, and Luke. It's in those 3 Gospels. And each of them have a little different, flavor. I don't know if that's the right word. They have a little different perspective, on the Transfiguration, on that whole story. And so we're going to be in each 3. And so there's no real smooth way to do it. I'm going to just kind of read part of one, and then if there's a different element of a different gospel of it, I'm just going to read the next one, and we're kind of going to go back and forth. So I hope it's not too confusing. But so anyway, we're going to do that. And in Matthew, the story is in Matthew 17. In Mark and Luke, it is in chapter 9 of Mark and Luke. So we're going to start with Matthew's account of the Transfiguration story. And that's Matthew 17, starting in verse 1. It says, after 6 days, Jesus took with him Peter and James and John his brother, and led them up a high mountain by themselves. And he was transfigured before them, and his face was shining like the sun, and his clothes became white as light. And behold, there appeared to them Moses and Elijah talking with him. So Jesus grabs kind of the inner circle, Peter, James, and John, and takes them up on a mountain. And Matthew and Mark say that Jesus was transfigured. It literally, the Greek word is metamorphos. It sounds, it's a metamorphosis kind of. And we do get a description of what happened. His face was shining like the sun. His clothes became perfectly white. Mark says that his clothes became whiter than any laundromat could possibly make them. That's the way that Mark phrases it is kind of what he intends there. And not only this, but then there's Moses and Elijah talking to Jesus there. Can you imagine that? My gosh. You read the Bible and you're like, man, can you imagine being there? Being on that mountain, and it's Moses and Elijah talking to Jesus. And, I wonder if maybe, the Peter, James, and John were like, that's what Moses looked like? I thought he was shorter. Oh, wow, okay. I didn't know Elijah had glasses. They probably didn't have glasses back then, but you can't imagine what it would be like to see what these characters looked like. Now, in Luke, we get a couple extra tidbits in Luke's account at the beginning of this. So in Luke 9, verses 30 through 32, he says, "And behold, two men were talking with him, Moses and Elijah, who appeared in glory and spoke of his departure, which he was about to accomplish at Jerusalem. Now Peter and those who were with him were heavy with sleep, but when they became fully awake, they saw his glory and the two men who stood with them." So apparently Peter, James, and John fell asleep and they woke up to a shiny, bright Jesus and Moses and Elijah. Can you imagine waking up to that? You'd think you're still sleeping. That'd be pretty amazing. And it says they were speaking about his departure, which I think is pretty clearly about his death, burial, and resurrection and ascension. So back to Matthew 17, verse 4. "And Peter said to Jesus, 'Lord, it is good that we are here. If you wish, I will make 3 tents here, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah.'" And Mark and Luke both tell us that Peter said this because he was terrified and he just didn't know what to say, which makes sense. I mean, I don't think Elijah and Moses want a tent. They're probably with God. I don't think they need a tent. But anyway, so Matthew 17, verse 5, and he was still speaking with them, and behold, a bright cloud overshadowed them, and a voice from the cloud said, "This is my beloved Son, with whom I am well pleased. Listen to him." And when the disciples heard this, they fell on their faces and were terrified. But Jesus came and touched them and said, "Rise, have no fear." And when they lifted up their eyes, they saw no one but Jesus. And as they were coming down the mountain, Jesus commanded them, "Tell no one the vision until the Son of Man is raised from the dead." And Mark 9, verse 10 adds, "So they kept the matter to themselves, questioning what this rising from the dead might mean." So they still don't get it. They never really grasped the fact that Jesus was going to be killed and rise from the dead. But it's interesting is that this is not the only time when Jesus tells someone to be quiet. There are other times when Jesus does a miracle and he says, "Don't tell anybody what just happened." And assumedly, maybe it's if everybody went around shouting what happened, it could create a frenzy and get in the way of things. I'm not sure, but anyway, so then back in Matthew 17, verse 10, Peter, James, and John have a conversation. It says, "And the disciples asked him, 'Why do the scribes say that first Elijah must come?' He answered, 'Elijah does come, and he will restore all things. But I tell you that Elijah has already come, and they did not recognize him, but did to him whatever they pleased. So also the Son of Man will certainly suffer at their hands.' Then the disciples understood that he was speaking to them of John the Baptist." So John the Baptist was kind of another version of Elijah. And what's interesting here is a lot of people that believe in reincarnation, that when you die, you get reincarnated as something else. A lot of them try to point to this passage, to Elijah and John to prove reincarnation, right? Because Jesus said Elijah has come again. And it says it was John the Baptist. They say, "Oh, Elijah was reincarnated as John the Baptist." They say that. Here's the problem. How did Elijah die when he was on the earth? He didn't die. He didn't. So that debunks it, first of all. And second of all, Elijah appeared with Jesus. How can Elijah be John the Baptist when he's still Elijah? So I just wanted to clear that up. Sometimes when I hear something, I should be nice. When I hear something that's misinformed, that's the nice way to put it, misinformed. I was going to say stupid. I'm not going to say that. I'm going to say misinformed. I'm not going to say that that's stupid. That would not be very nice of me. That would not be very pastorly of me to say something is stupid behind the pulpit. So I'm not going to say that. I'm just going to say it's misinformed. Anyway, so what is the point of this? Why is this what I'm preaching this morning? So many Christians want these kinds of experiences. When you read the Bible, you read about these miracles that God did. You read about all the things that the Lord has done. And you read through just even after the biblical times, the past 2,000 years of church history, you read about just the revivals that happened and things that God does. It's easy to be like, I want that. Oh, I want those experiences. I want to experience these miracles and these amazing things, or you see services where weird things happen, right? Where people claim to be healed, or where people fall down, or they roll on the ground, and all this stuff. And so what happens, and I've seen this a lot, and this is easy to fall into. We look at the experiences, and we're like, I want those. I want to go to a service and fall down. I want to see miraculous healing and all that stuff. Or you read this transfiguration experience, and it's easy to say, man, I want Jesus to show up glowing white in front of me. I want to see all these things happen. And first of all, of course, we should desire to experience God. God's a person. When you have a relationship with a person, you want to experience them, of course. If you love somebody who's 1,000 miles away, and you're writing letters to each other, eventually that's not enough. You're like, I want to see them in person. I want to be in the same room as them. And so we should desire to have intimate experiences with God, of course, because He's a person and we have a relationship with God. And that's why God has given us His Holy Spirit, is so that we can have that intimate relationship with the Spirit of God within us. And I've been in services where God's presence is powerful and you can feel His presence. I've been in services where miraculous things happen. I've been in services where people fall down. I know people that have seen crazier things than that. And so I've seen things that happen that I know are God doing it. But I've also been in an environment where things like that happen and I know it's not God. I've seen services where it's very clear people are being manipulated. You have those preachers that lay hands on somebody and they start to push them so they'll fall over. That does happen. That's why whenever I'm in services like that and someone lays hands on me, I'm kind of like, okay, I'm kind of like this, because I'm like, if I'm falling over, it's God. I'm not giving you a mercy fall. If I'm going to go on the ground, it's got to. But I've seen it. I've seen it faked. I've seen it. I've also seen strange demonic activity, which is not nearly as fun as when God is moving. And what can happen is we see those experiences, or maybe you're in a service and you experience that, and you want that again. You want to go to another service that has these amazing experiences. And what can happen is it can be out of balance to where we don't so much want God, we just want this fun experience. And I've also seen it happen where they want to have a supernatural experience so much that they open themselves up to demonic activity, because Satan is more than willing to give you a supernatural experience if that's what you want. He's more than willing to fill that role. But so what is the point with all this? The point is this: Peter and James and John are having this amazing experience. They're seeing Jesus glowing white. They're seeing Moses and Elijah appear. It is, you talk about, nothing could top that, I don't think. But down from the mountain, there's a real world problem. And seeing Jesus glowing white has nothing to do with fixing that problem. Seeing Jesus glowing white is not going to help Peter, James, and John with anything happening down from the mountain. And we're going to see that. So Luke 9:37, on the next day, when they came down from the mountain, a great crowd met him. So according to Luke, Jesus and the others, they apparently stayed up there until the next day. And then when they came down, things were very interesting. So if we go to back to Mark chapter 9, verse 14, and when they came to the disciples, they saw a great crowd around them and the scribes arguing with them. And immediately all the crowd, when they saw him, Jesus, they were greatly amazed and ran up to him and greeted him. And he asked them, what are you arguing about with them? And someone from the crowd answered him, Teacher, I brought my son to you, for he has a spirit that makes him mute. And whenever it seizes him, it throws him down, and he foams and grinds his teeth and becomes rigid. So I asked your disciples to cast it out, and they were not able. In Luke's version, it says, and behold, a man from the crowd cried out, Teacher, I beg you to look at my son, for he's my only child. And behold, a spirit seizes him, and he suddenly cries out. It convulses him so that he foams at the mouth and shatters him and will hardly leave him. I begged your disciples to cast it out, but they could not. And finally, Matthew's version, Matthew 17, and when they came to the crowd, a man came up to him, kneeling before him, said, Lord, have mercy on my son, for he is an epileptic and he suffers terribly. He often falls into the fire and into the water, and I brought him to your disciples, and they could not heal him. So here's a father desperately trying to find relief for his son. And here's what's so interesting. In all these stories, it says he brought the son to the disciples, right? Jesus and Peter, James, and John are up on the mountain, but the other disciples are down there. And it says, and Jesus comes down. He's like, what's going on? And the guy's like, I brought him to your disciples. You guys are here. I brought my son. And they couldn't do anything to help him. And when he says, I brought them to your disciples, it's the same word that is used when people bring someone to Jesus. So he says, I brought them to your disciples pretty much the same way that somebody would have brought someone to Jesus. So what's going on? Well, it appears that the disciples apparently have somewhat of a reputation. And this father assumed the disciples of Jesus would probably be able to do the things that Jesus does. And I think a big reason for this is because in Matthew chapter 10, Jesus sends out his 12 disciples to cast out demons and heal the sick. And perhaps the father of this boy heard about that. Maybe he saw it and he's like, okay, these guys can do it. They can cast out demons. So he brings his son, but it doesn't work. The disciples can't cast it out. So remember, Peter, James, and John were up there with Jesus. The other 9 disciples most likely were on there. And I wonder, when the father brought his son to the other disciples, I wonder what their reaction was. Because remember, they previously had been able to do it. Maybe they thought, oh, sure, we can take care of it for you. No problem. I wonder if they thought, oh, we got to go get Jesus. I wonder if they just thought, oh, yeah, we can do that now. So we'll take care of it. And Jesus is going to tell them exactly why they couldn't do it at the end of this here. I imagine back in Matthew 10 when Jesus sends out the 12, and they cast out demons and heal the sick. I wonder if they thought, wow, look what I can do now. Later on in Luke, Jesus sends out 72 of them, right, to kind of do the same thing. And they're amazed at the demons responding to them and leaving. Remember what Jesus says? He says, no, do not get excited that the demons leave in your name. Get excited that your names are written in heaven. Don't get excited that just the demons are running when you cast them out. And so I think the father comes to these disciples and he's like, please, you've got to help my son. You've got to do it. And I think, I'm wondering if the disciples, based on what Jesus is going to say, if they're like, sure, we'll do it. That's our thing now. We cast out demons now. That's what we do. But they couldn't do it. It didn't work. It doesn't matter how many times they were able to do it. It never was them. It was always the power of Jesus that was doing it. And we need to be careful because I've seen it happen where God, I believe in the gifts of the Spirit. You look at 1 Corinthians, I think it's 12, and Paul talks about the gifts of the Spirit, the gift of faith, gift of healing, words of prophecy, words of wisdom, and so on. I believe that God still operates in those gifts of the Spirit. And I've seen people that maybe experience something like that, and I've seen them think, oh, this is mine now. This is my gift. I can do this whenever I want. It's mine. I've seen people literally say that to me, like thinking this is mine. But in 1 Corinthians 12:11, Paul says, all of these gifts are empowered by one and the same Spirit who gives them to each individually as he wills or as he wants to. So the Spirit, he gives spiritual gifts when and where and how he wants to. They're never our gifts. They're always God's gifts. And I just thought, if you think this is my thing now, I can do this now. You know what often will go to the wayside? Faith. If you have confidence in yourself, that makes it very easy to not have the faith in the God's power that you need to have. And so here's what Jesus says when he comes down from the mountain and everything happens. This is what Jesus says, Mark 9, verse 19. And Jesus answered them, "O faithless generation." He's talking to everybody. His disciples are there. Faithless generation. How long am I to be with you? How long am I to bear with you or put up with you? Bring him to me. Jesus is not happy. He's not happy that this child is still suffering. And he says, you faithless people, fine, bring the boy to me. I'll take care of it. And they brought the boy to him. And when the spirit saw Jesus, immediately it convulsed the boy, and he fell on the ground and rolled about, foaming at the mouth. And Jesus asked his father, how long has this been happening to him? And he said, from childhood. And it often has cast him into fire and into water to destroy him. But if you can do anything, have compassion on us and help us. And if you've ever wondered, why do demons hurt people? Why do they do that? One thought behind it in much of Jewish tradition, maybe I just opened up a can of worms. No, I'll close it quickly. We know that there are fallen angels, beings that God created that have fallen, and according to a lot of ancient Jewish tradition, to punish those fallen angels, what God did was he had them, and this also comes from the idea that maybe angels are actually physical beings as well. It comes from that idea. But basically that God said to these fallen angels, you will have all the cravings of flesh. You'll be hungry, you'll be thirsty, you'll be tired, you'll be, I don't know what the classy way to put it is. You'll have other desires, which shall remain nameless. I'm sure you know what I'm talking about, but you won't have a physical body. So you'll have all these desires, these physical cravings, but you'll never be able to satisfy them, which would be miserable, right? And so according to Jewish tradition, what these fallen angels do is, these are the demons, and they possess human bodies so they can fulfill their physical cravings. And because they know that human beings are special above all creation, we're made in the image of God, we are the pinnacle of God's creation. There is no creation, no creature that is higher on the totem pole than human beings, because we're made in the image of God. And so according to this tradition, because the demons hate humans so much, because we're made in God's image and we can be saved, they hate humans so much that they always hurt them whenever they possess them, just out of hatred. So that's an idea. The Bible doesn't say everything I just said, but it's at least an answer to the question if you're curious. So anyway, the Father says to Jesus, if you can do anything, have compassion on us and help us. And Jesus says to him, if I can, all things are possible for one who believes. Immediately, the father of the child cried out and said, I believe, help my unbelief. And when Jesus saw that a crowd came running together, he rebuked the unclean spirit, saying to it, "You mute and deaf spirit, I command you, come out of him and never enter him again." And after crying out and convulsing him terribly, it came out, and the boy was like a corpse, so that most of them said, "He's dead." But Jesus took him by the hand and lifted him up, and he arose. So it's interesting that Jesus looks at everybody in the crowd, including his disciples, and calls them this unbelieving generation. We need to note the honesty of the boy's father here. He doesn't pretend. It's like, "Oh, Jesus, I have faith." He doesn't pretend. He doesn't put on a show. He basically says, "Oh, Jesus, I don't completely believe the way I should." He's honest with him. And Jesus still heals the boy, even though the father says, "I don't know if I have the belief that I need, but I have something. Help me with the rest of it." But when you have other instances where Jesus goes into a town and the people don't have faith, he almost doesn't heal anybody. So why did he still heal the father's child, even though the father didn't seem to have faith? I think it's because the father was just honest with Jesus. And he wanted that faith that he knew he was supposed to have. And I think this is where the church fails so much. There's so many Christians and churches that want people to wear a mask, right? Where people feel like they have to pretend things are okay when they're not. They have to pretend that they're this one, in so much of the church today, people can't be honest if they're not perfect. They have to pretend because there's this atmosphere where people, they feel like there's not love. They feel like there'll just be judgment on them if they're honest and say, I sinned last night, I sinned this week. A lot of people, they feel like they don't feel the freedom to be honest because the atmosphere of a lot of churches is one of just, if you're not perfect, then you're horrible. And so a lot of people feel like they need to put a mask on when they come to church or when they're around a group of Christians. They feel like they have to pretend that they're something they're not. And I got to tell you, if you have this idea that you come to church perfect, the church isn't for you. You don't need God if you're perfect. The church is precisely for people that fail. The church is precisely for people that have fallen down. That's what the gospel's about. It's about people that have ruined it and gotten it wrong and have messed up. And if there's one place in the world where people should be able to come in and just talk about failing and not being what they should, it should be church. It should be the one place where you don't have to put a mask on. And and obviously I know even if a church is a place where people feel safe to do that, there's still some people that are afraid. They don't want to be honest. They're just afraid of what people might think. There's churches where people have to pretend that they don't dare ask a question. They're afraid to ask a question like, "Well, I don't get this," or "I don't understand who Jesus is," or "I don't know if I believe the Bible's the Word of God." They don't feel free to ask those questions because they'll just get ridiculed. Once again, that's just, in a lot of churches, a lot of pastors will just be like, "Shut up and just believe what you're told," and that's it, and that's all. It's like, that's not the church. That's not the gospel. That's not Jesus. We should not have to pretend in the church. We should not have to pretend to be something we're not. We should be able to be exactly who we are, which is fallen creatures that are seeking to walk in obedience to God best we can. And if we fall and we fail, we get back up, we repent, we say sorry, and we continue to walk in the fullness of the Spirit, walk in the grace of God. Anyway, I don't know if that made sense. We move on. Matthew 17:19. Then the disciples came to Jesus privately. Notice privately. And they said, why couldn't we cast it out? They didn't dare ask him in public. And Jesus said to them, because of your little faith. For truly I say to you, if you have faith like a grain of mustard seed, you will say to this mountain, move from here to there, and it will move, and nothing will be impossible for you. Mark 9:28. And when he had entered the house, his disciples asked him privately, why could we not cast it out? And he said to them, and this is interesting, this kind cannot be driven out by anything but prayer and fasting. And it's important to note the real emphasis there is on the prayer. It's not so much the fasting, but it's on the aspect of prayer. And so what is the whole point of this sermon? There are so many Christians that get so caught up in wanting to have the crazy experiences. They want to go to a service where they fall down, where somebody is claiming to have words of prophecy for people. And they want to do that so much. And they go to these services and there is what appears to be God moving and people are running around screaming. And that's what they want. But then they walk out the door and there is somebody lost in sin without Christ and they are unable to help them. They have no ability to bring them Jesus because they're not interested in Jesus. They're interested in some experience. So here's the thing, especially as God continues to move in our church and as maybe we experience some stuff, some weird stuff. The point is, our focus cannot be on wanting to see crazy things. Our focus has got to be on knowing the person of Jesus Christ and just doing what his word says. Because if I have to choose between being in a crazy service where gold dust falls from the ceiling or being able to go out the doors of the church and see someone dead in sin and sharing the gospel so they can be born again, I'm choosing that. I might put the gold dust in my pocket really quick so I, make a quick buck. But if our focus has got to be right, because I'll tell you what, when God moves, and I've seen it, when God moves and you see things happen, Satan is right there to try to tell you, oh, this is what it's, just focus on these things, forget everything else. And some people fall for that. So no matter what happens, no matter what God does, we need to, whatever we experience, it's up to God. Our job is to make sure we have the faith and the prayer to be able to minister to the people that have need. Because I read this story and it's like these disciples were up on the mountain and they had the most amazing experience and they come down and not one of them could help this little boy. So at the end of the day, it's not worth it. What's worth it is being able to minister to people and help them. So no matter what happens, I guess the whole point that God wants us to understand this morning is let's not get distracted from the main thing. Let's not get distracted and let's not chase after things that the Bible doesn't tell us to chase after. If God has weird things happen, that's up to him. We don't chase the weird things, we chase God. We always chase God. And then we receive whatever he wants to give us.